today I want to share with you a little bit of some of the things that I've been thinking or reflecting upon while I was away. I find the time off helps me to find, space and time to do some pondering. And one of the things that I was thinking about was my own spiritual journey. For me, a combination of the intensity of the last few years and probably a little bit of the burnout I confessed before I went away on my break has just meant that my own faith or passion was feeling a little flat. I don't know if anybody else has been feeling that of late. And so I started to do some reflecting about, what does that mean? And for me, when it comes to spiritual growth, there are some things that are helpful. And I just wanted to share three of those things. I think these things are fairly universal, so you might go, they're helpful for me too. So, for example, learning or reading the Bible or exploring the questions, as John talked about in the all-age talk, are things that are really helpful for me for my own spiritual growth. Intellectually engaging and stimulating, how does, God work or the Bible work or the faith and digging down into that. I find for myself personally, it's the questions that help me to grow. It's in the questions that I find the revelation of God. But I'm also a person who actually finds doing faith really helpful as well. Living out my faith. At the core of who I am is a desire to want to be a person who can make a difference in people's lives, in the communities that are around me and in the world. And that is a response to my faith. And so I live out my faith, and as I put my faith into action, that is spiritually enriching. But I also want to include a third one there, that our faith can be enriched by our own personal relationship with Jesus or engaging with spiritual experiences. And that could be things like worship and prayer. It's tapping into this spiritual dimension or being in the presence of God. Now, there's probably more than those three things, and you might have other things that are helpful to you. But if I just take these three, I'll ask the question, which of those things are good for you? Which one do you go, it's that one? Or it's a combination of those two that are really good for me in my own spiritual journey? If I then go on and ask the question, which one of these are you investing in your time and energy into doing right now? They might be helpful for you, but are you actually engaging with those things at the moment? Is there any of these three that you might have neglected a bit over the last 12 months, where you might be going, I haven't done much of that of late? For me, my role sort of means that I have to invest in that first one, about intellectual engagement. When you're preaching, you have to do that work. And I'm a sort of person, as I said, who likes to do things, so that second one resonates well with me as well. But I have to confess, over the past few years, other than my infrequent rush prayers and my time of weekly worship, that third one is looking a little sparse. It's not been as great as the other two, which is possibly why when I was away, I ran across a tweet, because I was still on Twitter, I ran across a tweet that really jumped out at me. This was the tweet. It says, one of the most startling expositions on prayer I've ever heard from Tim Mackie of the Bible Project. People weeping, the Spirit tangibly moving, as self-confessed Bible nerd quietly geeked out on the infinite possibilities of communion with God. Now, I know, I don't know personally, but I know of Tim Mackie and have used a lot of his stuff. Have you ever seen any of the Bible Project? If you haven't, Google Bible Project and you will be amazed. He is one of the two key people who do all that work, and they are fantastic in being able to explain parts of the Bible in a really interesting and engaging way. But I read this tweet and I go, and he's talking about prayer and communion with God? There's something in that really caught my attention and went, I'd love to hear that talk. I'd love to hear that talk. The talk was at the 2022 USA 24 24/7 prayer conference. I don't know if you heard about the 24/7 prayer movement, but if you have, it was their conference. And unfortunately, this talk is not publicly available. You can't go to Google and just go, oh, there it is, I'll watch it now, because it was done at a conference and you could only hear the talk if you went to the conference. But I did work out that if I registered for the conference, even though the conference had just finished, I could still register for it and still watch it. I don't think you can do that anymore, unfortunately. So instead, I'm going to share some of his sermon with you. But I do say, if you think this is good, give him all the credit, because a lot of the sermon you're just about to hear actually has started from his talk. So as mentioned, Tim is the co-founder of the Bible Project and spends a lot of his time immersed in the Bible. And so when he was asked to speak on the topic of prayer, he says he went through a series of emotions. Once again, see if you can relate to some of these. He said first he felt very guilty because he thought that if I'm going to speak on prayer, maybe prayer should be more part of my life, and it's not. And then he said he felt fear because he said maybe everybody else has got this amazing prayer life where they're connecting with God in prayer and I don't. And then he felt a bit of resignation because he said, but I've got no idea how to actually address that problem. And so maybe this is just the way it is. I know for some of you, spending time in prayer is something that becomes very easy and natural for you. And I want to affirm you in that. I want to say it is such a blessing to have people who pray regularly as part of our church community. It's not only a blessing for you, it's a blessing for this community. And as I said, I really want to affirm you in that. But if you are a person like Tim, where prayer is not a natural thing, where it's not easy to do, or part of your spirituality, the question becomes, if we believe that there is something helpful or important in prayer, then how do we find a way to make this work? How do we open ourselves up to the shaping that comes with prayer? How can we tap into prayer in such a way that it leads to a season of spiritual renewal? I don't know, I'm hearing Tim say this and I'm finding my own spirit going, yes, those are good questions. Tim was saying that he was feeling sad about the perception of missing the presence of God in his life and wanted to experience that more. And wondered if prayer could be a path that could be helpful in that. And then he told a story, which I'm going to share with you now. Tim was feeling a bit run down and decided to go for a hike in the national park near where he lived, which was the Mount Hood National Park in Oregon in the States. You can already see how this is resonating with me, can't you? Because you go, that's my story. So he's on a park, and well, it is resonating with me because this is similar. That looks really beautiful, doesn't it? So does this photo of my holidays. It's amazing how you can put your own holiday photos in a sermon. And so Mara and I went for a hike up to Marin's Lookout at Cradle Mountain, which was a cracker of a walk if you've ever done it. And that was the day we went on. Wasn't it beautiful? But we did other walks too. We went to St. Columbia Falls. We went down to Wineglass Bay. We went over the rocks at the Bay of Fires. We did a lot of walking. I better get back to Tim's story here and stop showing you photos of my holidays. Anyway, so Tim's gone for this walk. And as he says, he goes, when he's doing this hiking, he often gets lost in his thoughts because it's quite a meditative process. And he's walking along and he's looking down, making sure he's not tripping over rocks, as you do when you hike. And he hears this rustling next to him in the bushes. And he goes, oh no, am I just about to get attacked by wildlife? And he turns around to see what's rustling in the bushes. And out pops another hiker who's stuffing her face with huckleberries. Now, I didn't even know what a huckleberry was, but it looks like a bit like a blueberry, apparently. Stuffing her face with huckleberries. And you know, Tim is a bit stunned and looking at her, and she goes, There's huckleberries everywhere. And Tim looks around, and sure enough, he is in this middle of this massive, massive field of huckleberry bushes that are all ripe and overladen with huckleberries. And he's just going, I didn't even notice. He looks back down the path that he just walked up and realises he's been walking through this field probably for a kilometre and did not notice that he's been surrounded by this amazing bounty of huckleberries. But you can do that when you're hiking, can't you? You're so focused on the path and so focused on not spraining your ankle on a rock that you forget to look up. When Mara and I were walking down to Wineglass Bay, I took this photo because I'm looking at the path, and when you looked up, that's what you're looking at, and you're going, oh my, you should look up more often, shouldn't you, when you're hiking? And Tim had this epiphany. He sort of wondered, is that a bit like his own spirituality? Is he so focused on the stuff that he's doing, which he acknowledges is a set of spiritual habits which is helpful for him, like digging down in the questions of the Bible? Is he so focused on that he's not realising that he is surrounded by an abundance of other spiritual riches all around him that he's not noticing? And how does he tap into that more? For me, in terms of the things I put up before, it made me wonder, have I been focused so much on those first two, my spiritual growth through intellectual engagement or spiritual growth through doing my faith, that I'm missing the overwhelming bounty of spiritual growth that can come through just being in the presence of God or focusing on my relationship with Jesus? We'll come back to that because that's a really important point. But because Tim is a self-confessed Bible nerd, he goes, all right, what does this mean in terms of the Bible then? And he started with the passage that we had in our Bible reading today, that Good Friday narrative of Jesus and the thief on the cross. And look, I don't have time to unpack that whole passage, unfortunately. I have a feeling I'm going to preach too long today anyway, and so I'm going to skip over that and just focus in on two particular verses where Jesus is talking to the thief. And the thief says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus says, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Now, John's already started this question. What do we mean by this word paradise? What do we mean by this word paradise? Often we just replace it with the word heaven. It's a natural response when we see that word paradise. But Jesus didn't use the word heaven. There is a Greek word for heaven, and it's not the word that Jesus uses here. Instead, he uses the Greek word parasitio, I think it's called, which literally means garden. If you kept on scrolling down in that thing, you would have seen that. The Greek means garden. So what was Jesus trying to say to the thief? I will see you later today in the garden. It doesn't really make sense. But Jesus didn't use the word for heaven. He used the word for this special garden. So what is he meaning by which garden is he talking about? Well, they didn't have the New Testament back then. They only had the Old Testament. And what is the garden in the Old Testament? The Garden of Eden. But that doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. To say, I will see you later today in the Garden of Eden, which was something in the past. So we hear about the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 2, where God created this amazing place out of nothing, a place of light and full of blessings. It had the tree of life there. Is Jesus meaning that that's where he's meeting the thief? It's a bit of a puzzle, isn't it? But it's not the only place where this word is used in the Bible. But Tim started to explore the question then, Well, if it's not in the past, then when is paradise? You see, it could either be Genesis 2 or could, when Jesus is talking to the thief, it could be the immediate future. Today, this afternoon, I'm going to see you in paradise. But there's other versions as well. Like if you go to the end of the Bible in Revelation chapter 21, 22, it talks about a new heaven and a new earth, and this place has got a garden in it, and in the garden there is the tree of life again, and maybe it was actually referred to as this place of paradise. And so maybe that's what Jesus is talking about, this future garden. So is paradise in the future, so to speak? That sometime in the future, that's where Jesus and the thief will meet up. But then Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 talks about this time when he was caught up he talks about a vision and caught up in the third heaven, and he says, I don't know whether it's in the body, whether it was real and physical, or whether it wasn't. He says, I don't know how this is all working, but I was caught up into paradise. But for Paul, he talks about that not as something that happened in the past or in the future, but something that was happening right now. So when Tim, being this self-confessed Bible nerd, asked the question, when is paradise? Do you know what his answer was? Yes. He goes, it's really all of the above. He goes, well, what did Jesus say in Revelations 1:8? He goes, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, who was, who always will be. Maybe the answer is just yes, it's all of those things. So he then asked the next question, as John said in his all-age talk. It's good to ask questions. He said, well, if I can't work out when is paradise, can I work out at least where is paradise? Where is paradise? But that's not as helpful as either, because you can start to look around through the Bible, like the Apostle John had a vision where he was caught up into paradise in Revelations chapters 1 and 2. And he says, I was on an island in Patmos, and then I was caught up in the Spirit. So is paradise on a Greek island, or is it when you're caught up in the Spirit? But then later in Revelation chapter 2, he's talking, John in his vision is talking to Jesus, and Jesus gives him a whole bunch of letters to give to real churches at the time. 7 letters, and one of those letters was to the church in Ephesus, where Jesus says to them, if you do these things, if you live faithful in this way, you will eat with me from the tree of life in paradise. So maybe paradise is in a church, because that's what Jesus was saying to this church. Or if you go back in the Old Testament to the story of Jacob, when Jacob fell asleep in the desert place and he sees the stairway to heaven, the ladder up into heaven, and he discovers by engaging with that paradise. And then when he wakes up, he says, God was in this place and I never knew. So maybe paradise is in the desert place. Or maybe it's like Ezekiel, when Ezekiel was meeting with his friends and they said they were caught up in an altered consciousness, whatever that means. And they have this experience of seeing this bright figure, and they realise that they are in a place where they are meeting with Almighty, and it was described as paradise. But they were just in a house. So it was paradise in a house. And Tim, this Bible nerd, says, well, which answer is it? And the way he answers that is, exactly. Can you see the point he's trying to make here? It's really hard to put our finger on what all this is, because it's almost all of these things. It's almost all of these things. He goes on to say, one of the problems that we have in 20th century or 21st century Western society is that we don't think the same as first century Christians. And he went on to say that they had a very clear understanding of different forms of reality. So they understood the physical dimension, which is what we see and feel and hear and touch and smell. And he also talks about that they had a clear understanding that there's a spiritual dimension. a dimension which is not perceptible by our senses, that's not bound by, the 4 dimensions that we live in, but rather is this thing that is still very real that we can interact with. And Tim wondered, is paradise a symbolic way of trying to describe what that dimension is all about? The paradise is this spiritual dimension. And then he went a step further and had a bit of an epiphany that says maybe paradise is not about a place or a time, but is actually about a person. Paradise is a person. Because he says, where do we put the emphasis on that Bible reading verse? Jesus said to the thief, today you'll be with me in paradise. Do we put the emphasis on paradise, or do we put the emphasis on with me? It's the whole point that Jesus is trying to say to the thief is that you're going to be with me. And if you are with me, then that is paradise. That is paradise. If this is right, then it doesn't matter if you're in the past or the present or the future future, or whether you're on a Greek island or in a desert place or in the middle of nowhere or in a home. If this is correct, then we are only a moment away from seeing the huckleberries. We are only a moment away from paradise. It's a good paragraph, wasn't it? That was Tim's writing, not mine. But it's a good paragraph. But my question that I add to that is, but what does that mean for us? If we are only a moment away from paradise, then what does it mean for us to be with Jesus? As I said at the beginning, I seem to resonate with it, but I think we do this well as a church, the first 2. We do really well exploring the questions. We do well at encouraging people to live out their faith. I don't know, can I be critical of myself and say, how well have I been encouraging you in your own personal relationship with Jesus and engaging with the spiritual dimension over the last little while? How can we engage with that more? And as Tim said, how can prayer be an avenue in that? How can prayer be more than just in a session where we ask God for stuff, or maybe at the beginning of the service where we declare how great God is? How can prayer be something that helps us to deeply connect and experience the spiritual dimension, to actually experience and hear from God? Tim said, take Luke chapter 9 as an example, when Jesus took Peter and James and John up the mountain to pray. And when they're up there to pray, what happens? They have an experience of the spiritual dimension. It isn't about the words or the learning or the encouragement to go and live out their faith. What happens on the top of the mountain? They have an experience of God. They get caught up in a different dimension where Jesus is transformed, where they see and interact with Moses and Elijah, and where God speaks to them. He said, you can take the example of Pentecost. When they're in the house, they have an experience of God in the wind and in the flames. Yes, they went out and lived out their faith, but it started from an experience. And any of the stories I've said today, it's the same. Whether you're talking about John or Paul or Ezekiel or Jacob or Peter or James, they all had this experience of the spiritual dimension, an experience of being in the presence of God where it's rich and real and interactive. But it's more than that. In all of these stories, they experience a person. They encountered Jesus or God or the Holy Spirit in a real and a personal way. And my question to you this morning is, would you like that too? Would you like that? Would you like to have an experience where you are experiencing Jesus or God or the Holy Spirit in a real and personal way? For some of us, worship does that for us. Gathering on a Sunday and worshipping does that for us. But worship should be more than just learning from a sermon or being challenged to go out and live your life. It shouldn't be that place where we are coming into the presence of God and experiencing God in that real and personal way, where we find ourselves immersed in the very presence of God. I've probably been on this journey for a little while, but I feel like I'm starting it again. This journey of, well, what does that mean for me now? What does it mean to have tapping into the spiritual dimension at the moment? And I'm wondering whether or not anybody else would like to come on this journey with me. I'm not sure what that even looks like when I ask that question. There's not a whole lot of Sundays free between now and Christmas, so I can't really do this in a sermon series at the moment. And I'm not sure what this means, but I guess I'm offering to meet with some people, to talk about this, to explore what this means, but more importantly, to actually spend some time trying to do this, whether it's praying or being open or tapping into this spiritual dimension. Maybe I could meet one-on-one with people or in small groups with people just a couple of times between now and Christmas and see what we can discover. I just want to learn together what this might mean for us, to experience more of the presence of God in our lives, to look up and to see the huckleberries and indulge in that spiritual blessing. If you're a person who's already experiencing this in your life, then once again I want to affirm you and celebrate that with you, but want to gently suggest that you don't have to come on this journey with me if you're already doing it. I just want you to keep doing what you're doing, and maybe humbly ask to pray for me and the rest of us. But if you're in a place like me, that God is stirring a desire to feel and connect with God more or Jesus more in an experiential way, in a personal way, and if you're willing to prioritise this over the next month or so, then consider coming on the journey with me. I'm really not expecting too many people to respond to this invitation, but if you're listening to this in the building or online or later online and would like to, send me a message. Say, yep, I'd love to be on this journey with you. And I'm making the commitment to meet up with you and we'll explore together. If you are interested in discovering together, send me a message. So when you're on this journey, wherever you are on this journey, I once again really just encourage you to hear that invitation from Jesus today. The invitation he gave to the thief, but it's the invitation he gives to all of us to come and to be with him in the garden, to walk with Jesus in paradise. May we all be open to that experience. Amen.